Interviews, insights and advice from industry experts, keeping you connected in the legal community. Good afternoon everyone, and welcome along to episode 3 of In Discussion with Denovo, connecting the legal community with interviews, insights and advice from industry experts. I'm here as normal with my colleague Stephen Hill, Denovo's Operations Director, and our guest today, Mr. Graeme McKinstry, the Director of McKinstry Practice Management. So just give you a bit of background about Graeme. Graeme founded the McKinstry company 32 years ago and guided that firm through its development from a one-man band into a full-service practice across 3 offices comprising 5 partners and a complement of 40 people. So Graeme's been awarded the highly coveted accolade of Managing Partner of the Year at the Law Awards, as a Law Society of Scotland committee member, Professional Development Officer at Strathclyde University, and a lecturer on behalf of the Law Society of Scotland, as well as being a successful advisor to the legal profession. As I've mentioned, also the Director of McKinstry Practice Management, which is a bespoke practice consultancy and advisory service tailored for the legal profession. A busy man by the sounds of it. So today we will be discussing how everything has changed for everyone in the legal profession. What Graeme will do is he'll outline what you can do in the meantime, prepare for life post-lockdown and shape the future of your business. Now more than ever, it's critical to leverage advice and support being given out by anyone in the legal community. So not only to adapt to what is now the new normal behaviours of working, but to survive and prosper beyond lockdown. And as I've mentioned in previous episodes, Denovo, here at Denovo, we're currently campaigning for the legal community to really join forces as part of our hashtag In This Together campaign. This has been following conversations with several firms who are keen to keep things moving along at this time. And as part of the initiative, we became aware that Graeme and McKinstry Practice Management have made the decision to offer initial free, no obligation advice to help any firm in the country to navigate their way through one of the most challenging periods we've all experienced in our lifetimes. And moreover, they will be providing insight into how firms can future-proof their businesses for success at the other end. Graeme will also go into detail about how McKinstry Practice Management are supporting the legal community to navigate the next few months alongside efforts to restructure, find a new direction and future strategy or any other management issues. So just want to say thanks very much for joining us, Graeme.
Well, thank you both very much for your invitation. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope that in the course of the afternoon we're able to be positive in all the things that we share with those who are listening in and those who will listen in the future.
Excellent. Yeah, it's great to have you. So the agenda for today is relatively straightforward. So we've had a bit of an overview. We'll go straight into the discussion. We'll have a bit of chat about the free support and advice that Graeme's offering. There'll be a bit of time for a Q&A, talk about the next week's episode and how you can get in touch with Graeme, and then how to watch the webinar. Again, as normal, we are recording. So Graeme, I think we'll just go into our first question really. So how has everything changed for the legal profession?
I think the answer very simply is like never before. I've been here practicing law for over 40 years and I've got the white hair to show it. And I've seen things in the past, like for those who are old enough to remember, there was a civil service strike in the late 80s, early 90s. Then, of course, there was the financial crash, 2007, 8, 9, which impacted on the profession, and we had casualties in the profession in the high street and elsewhere. But nothing compares anything remotely as seriously as the impact of COVID-19, both now and, unfortunately, for an interminable time for the future. You've used the words a couple of times in your introduction or the description of navigating, and I hope that in the course of this afternoon we'll be able to look at a compass and look at some of the compass points to find a positive way out of this very difficult situation which we face.
Yeah.
Everything has changed in the sense that the vibrancy, the activity, the busyness, the human contact of all of our law practices, whether high streets or elsewhere, has quietened and sadly in some cases has been silenced. Staff on furlough, some have already been made redundant and some are on reduced conditions. And the client aspect of work is effectively at a trickle. We're not helped, of course, because the courts impacting not just on litigation, but on commissary work and the myriad other things that go through our court system. The property market and commercial activity is virtually at a standstill. And against all that background, the costs of running the practice are by and large still continuing unaffected. And the key is that, as we said earlier, this could endure for a very uncertain time. So these are difficult times for the profession.
Absolutely. So with that in mind, what can firms do in the meantime?
In adversity, experience has taught us that there is room for optimism, there is room for opportunity, and there is room for being positive. But it is essential that we are able to galvanise our talents. We're clever people in the legal profession, very well educated, very high professional standards, and many have run successful businesses over a long number of years. So there's a lot of talent that at the moment is pent up and needs to be released. And that talent can be used in the short and then in the medium term to take your point about navigating us through. So instantly, on the financial side, there are a number of immediate steps that can be taken and might apply to many of the listeners today. The four headline financial points relate in no particular order, because each is important, because every pound that can be generated or every pound that can be saved is a prisoner right now. So there is rates relief available under a government scheme for premises up to a value of £35,000, or for more than one. So if a business has got more than one set of premises, up to a value of 35,000 in cumulative, they can apply for rates relief immediately. If there's one unit to £18,000, the same application can be made. Now, those are significant numbers, particularly for smaller firms. Only yesterday, the initiative of what's called bounce back loans was introduced, and that's a loan. I appreciate loans have to be repaid, but it is financial stimulus to practices where money is very tight at the moment, up to £50,000. They're backed 100% by the national government, and they're interest-free for a period of 12 months, by which time we have to hope that there is a generated income and better cash flow for us all. The third option, of course, is the business interruption loan scheme, where effectively, again, it's a loan, but again, the banks are being backed to the tune of 80% by the government guarantee. And again, although it's a loan and therefore has to be repaid, it might be a lifeline for many firms or businesses where the traditional income streams of court work, of commissary work, and a property market are at starvation point. And then lastly, on the financials, there is the Small Business Support Grant, which is available to those smaller businesses, which, remember, make up, by and large, the vast proportion of our profession, our 11,000 lawyers or so across Scotland. And in that situation, you can apply right up until March of next year for a grant, not repayable, from the local authority to the value of £10,000. So those are the financials that can be done right now. But it's also very important to look after yourselves, to stay safe physically, obviously, from the virus, but psychologically, to be active and to retain your appetite and energy, so that when the tap is released, we're able to take forward initiatives for the business, and we'll talk about that later. But apart from looking after yourselves as employers and owners of businesses, it's equally important that you look after your people, because remember, they are actually the lifebloods of our businesses.
Yeah.
Often in normal times, when life is active and we're very busy down at the court or in meetings or wherever, the office goes on often without us, and 90% of the work of a typical lawyer is actually carried out and executed by others. So it's vitally important that we take time out to ensure that we look after our people. And there's myriad different ways of doing that, by keeping in contact with them, ensuring that they haven't forgotten you, and maintaining their own morale and enthusiasm for when the time comes for them to come back.
Sure. No, it's all really, really good points. So then, looking to the future, what should firms be doing right now to get themselves ready?
Again, in the opportunity that we have, it's important that it's taken. Lawyers can use their native wit, intelligence, and experience, and they can use it in a slightly different way. I come across many lawyers when I talk about budgeting. So that's one of the things that can be done, indeed must be done.
Yeah.
Budgeting, lawyers would often say to me, oh, I haven't time for that. I'm too busy doing whatever it is I do, defending people or pursuing people or in the office. I haven't got time for all of that. It's highfalutin. Well, it's not highfalutin at all. It's actually very easy. But apart from being easy, now in these unprecedented times, it's not really an optional extra. It's a fundamental of maintaining a profitable and solvent business. Now, there are three options when it comes to budgeting, because I don't want people's eyes in any way to glaze over and think, oh, what's he on about now? So the three things that I've encountered in my 40-odd years in the practice: a blank sheet, which is basically hope for the best, look at last year's profit and loss account, and as long as we do that, we'll be okay. And in good times, I have to say, that rather basic or non-approach seems to work. Mm-hmm. But I don't advocate that for now, because we're really clearly not in good time. So the two real options, apart from doing nothing, firstly, are an approach called incremental budgeting. Now, that sounds fancy, but it's pretty straightforward. And what I would encourage listeners to do is to take last year's profit and loss account and look at each of the entries and add to them or subtract from them a floating percentage. And by that I mean, if you look at your staff costs, because that tends to be the biggest single unitary cost of any business. Secondly, look at premises, because that tends to be the second biggest cost. And thirdly, look at IT, because that often is a major expense as well. And look at them from the perspective not of last year's profit and loss account, but take that as the base and look to the next 12 or 18 months and look to see how those major costs will vary, and apply what I would call the incremental approach, which is adding on, for example, 10% or subtracting 10%. The likelihood in general, and I emphasize in general, is going to be that budgeting costs, with one big exception that I'll come on to, are likely to reduce. So premises costs may well go down for the reasons that we've discussed on rates, etc. There could be rent holidays, there could be discussions about relief on rent or reducing rent. The staff costs may well go down in the long term. Obviously, if there are redundancies to be met, that's an immediate cost. But those factors go into the budget for the next 12 or 18 months. And the same approach would be taken with IT. So the incremental approach is basically looking at all of the costs, from insurance to rent to property to energy to people, etc., and adding on or subtracting as the owners of the business see the practice going forward in the next 12 months. The more subtle and more scientific approach to budgeting, however, is called zero-based budgeting, or ZBB. And again, the starting point And this is the one I really would recommend, because to be fair, we've got lots of time on our hands now, and there really isn't the excuse or explanation of saying I don't have the time to do it. It's not difficult, but it requires application. So the zero-based approach is you again go to the profit and loss account, and you then strip out every figure against every item. So if we take, for example, staff costs, and for example, we said last year in the business they were 300,000. We then put a zero against staff costs, hence zero-based budgeting approach. So it's nil for staff, and we then project for the next 12 months, what are the staff costs going to be? So there will be salary, obviously, there will be national insurance, but this is a scientific approach. So there will be things like recruitment costs, things like training costs, things like locum cover for people on illness or, for example, on maternity leave. And sadly, there might be settlement agreements for those who are going to be made redundant or whatever. So the zero-based approach, applying it by way of example to staff costs, is a more scientific way of the business owner looking to the next 12 or 18 months to see what his costs are going to be. And again, just to emphasize the point, if we took property, which is often another big outlay, look at the property costs in terms of rent. Is there an opportunity for that to be restructured? In terms of rates, we've already looked at that. And in terms of a more radical consideration is, are these premises now fit for purpose, given the change that we have gone through? And taking the zero-based approach, you then can see, projecting over the next, for example, 12 months, what the likely costs are going to be. Now, budgeting, of course, has got more than costs to it. It has income to it. And the zero-based approach is also one that commends itself when we are going to be starting, if not from a zero base, literally, when we get back to some form of normalcy, we're going to be starting from a much lower base. And therefore, what can be done now is for firms to be looking, as they prepare that budget, which could be used, for example, for the bank, but it can also be used, more importantly, for businesses and business owners to get a real handle on the actual financial position of their business. But we can also look at it from the point of view of how and what income are we going to generate. So to give a simple example, if our budget figure by either of the two approaches that I'm suggesting comes, say, to £400,000 for the purposes of the conversation, the next challenge is, from where are we going to generate the £400,000? Because remember, that's what has to be generated before the poor partner, owner, member, director, or whatever gets anything out of this. And it's then a question of looking at in what way the business can then be developed. And we'll perhaps look at that a bit later on.
Yeah. So preparation seems to be, you know, I suppose a recurring theme of this, you know, that we now have time to prepare. So how should firms be preparing for life post-lockdown?
Well, the first thing I think to do is to make sure that the base from which we're going to be starting is as high as possible. Therefore, convert every item, and I mean every item, of work in progress into fee income. There's not a law practice I've visited in the country that doesn't have a surprisingly understated work in progress figure. And without getting into whether that's a good thing or a bad thing in normal times, these are not normal times. And therefore, it behoves us all to ensure that we can convert all of that work done and not feed, called work in progress, into money. And we should do that instantly. And we've got all the time in the world to do that. Secondly, what we can do in planning our budget, we can then plan a business development plan. And I hope listeners won't think this is pie in the sky, but this is really a golden opportunity for busy practitioners who often are far too consumed with delivering the quality services that they deliver to sit back and, to coin a phrase from the management gurus, work on the business rather than in their business. And working on the business brings the opportunity to prepare, possibly for the first time, a proper business development plan. And again, there are fairly basic and quite quick fixes that can put that together. For example, you would look at not what the budget for last year showed in terms of fee income, but break that fee income into its constituent elements. So much conveyancing, so much court work, and so on. And then that informs intelligently your thinking for the business plan going forward as to how we regenerate for the period ahead. A very wise business leader many years ago said that if a private practice in law had been in existence for 10 years, it didn't need new clients if it harvested the potential that those existing clients already had in its potential. A good CRM system will enable you to identify your clients by, for example, geography, by age, or by work type that they have generated in the past. And that would be the starting point. I think people are anxious about being peppered and infiltrated with email and being bombarded, so some care requires to be taken. But with care and sensitive and sensible drafting, e-shots, mail shots, or letters to their clients offering your services, for example, to existing clients, a free review of their personal and financial circumstances going forward. Secondly, from existing clients, we have to look at other clients, new clients, and that would involve, possibly for the first time, what you might call a marketing initiative or a marketing profile or plan. So there are all types of things available in the modern world, and some are very inexpensive to use. E-technology and e-business generally has revolutionized the way in which law practices and law businesses can advertise their services. But older-fashioned media are still useful too. And again, dependent upon the location of the practice, they may already enjoy a fairly high profile in a town or smaller city or in a rural situation. So I would rule nothing out. For example, an attractive press advertisement reminding the world that you're open and able for business. The old-fashioned mail drop, which can go to the properly targeted locations in the area. Radio advertising is becoming, in some parts of the country, very, very attractive for lawyers. So there is no one-size-fits-all. And what might suit one practice to build its development or marketing plan might not suit another. But my overall suggestion is that we have got talent. We know best our clientele. We know best our local market. And therefore, we know best what strategies and what tactics to use as a bridge to take our talents, our knowledge, our know-how, our experience to that market. And I think now is an ideal time, not only to get our financial structure clearly understood, but also among the partners and owners of the business, and then to be shared with the team in the business how we plan to take the business forward when the doors begin to open again. Because an important element in all of this is to bring the team with you, and that's much more likely to happen if you've communicated with them and they understand why we're doing the things that we're going to do.
Yeah, I think that's a very relevant point. It's something that we've been speaking to a lot of our partners about. You know, I suppose it's time to reflect and think about what makes your business successful. You know, what makes your customers / clients keep coming back? What communication platforms brought them to you in the first place, be that physically or virtually? But it's, you know, for me, it's this feels like the time where anyone who's running a firm, you know, or part of a firm, it's the time to sort of take the pulse of that business, you know.
Sure, so often we're so busy doing good work, and lots of good work for lots of people who benefit from what we provide. We're just so busy we don't have the opportunity to stand still and actually look at what we're doing and how we're doing it.
Yeah. I think setting sort of realistic KPIs, like, you know, what you've been talking about, is really important. It then allows you to make informed, data-driven decisions going forward as well, and that's vitally important. You know, you've spoken about, well, clearly we're a tech company, but you've spoken about the importance of technology, and that is something that we are doing a lot of at the moment with our existing partners, is trying to ensure that they have all that data at their fingertips to whether it's to communicate, whether it's to understand as much about their own business right now as they possibly can. And then you're right, it's, you know, we've got to bring the team with you, you've got to look after them. So give them the tools to be able to perform at the best of their ability, you know, maximising their efficiency at the same time, but so that they can deliver the service that they normally would, but just in a new environment, you know. So no, it's all really, really good points. So one of the things that we mentioned earlier was that you were going to be offering support to, I suppose, what we're all calling the legal community. Can you explain a little bit about how you're going to be doing that?
Sure. I hope that we're communicating and generating an air of positivity about all of this in these dark and difficult times. Law practices are vibrant places, and they are essential places, and there will always be need for lawyers. However, the likelihood is that our traditional business model of partnership, or even a limited liability partnership, for the majority, is probably not now going to be as fit for purpose for the future. And going back to where we started with this, it's all change. I want to encourage people to have the opportunity to sit back in a careful, considered, but relaxed way to look at their business. And McKinstry Practice Management offers to any law practice in Scotland the opportunity of 2 consultations without charge. There's no catch in this. This offer is here to be helpful, because it's important that we have a strong, independent and vibrant legal profession. Our community needs, demands and deserves that, and we're the only people who can provide that. And my hope is that I can contribute in a small way to encouraging people to be positive about their businesses going forward. And one thing I can do is to offer to them 2 consultations to each practice unit, entirely free of charge, with no obligation whatsoever. And we can look at them, and obviously in a confidential way, and drill into the points that we could only touch the headlines of this afternoon. And that offer is available effectively until the end of the year. And it's an opportunity, it's an offer. And I would like to think that people would be encouraged, attracted to that, because it's difficult for me to see how that is anything other than a win-win. Because the worst that could happen for someone taking up the opportunity is to go through the exercise of looking at their business with me and deciding that they don't want to take up a recommendation. The worst for them is at least at no cost to them, they've had the opportunity of an X-ray on their business. And what I would do in a simple way in those 2 consultations is to carry out what you might call, and many will be familiar with this, a SWOT analysis. Mm-hmm. It's a great business tool, and it's great because of its simplicity and its effectiveness, looking at the strengths of the unit, the weaknesses of the unit, the threats that unit faces, but more importantly and more positively, the opportunities in what's going to be a difficult time. for that practice going forward in the future. And that's the offer that I make to the profession.
I think it's a fantastic offer, and off the back of what you've said today, I'm sure there will be many out there who will take you up on that. I think in the midst of everything else that's going on, there are people and businesses out there who are really trying to do the right thing, and by the sounds of it, that's exactly what you're doing. So I know that I definitely commend you for that. I'm sure everybody else will, and I'm sure that if and when they do receive the advice and support from you, that they'll be very, very grateful for it. So what we'll do now, thank you for all of that, Graeme. We have had a couple of questions come in. So if I just pass you over to Stephen. Stephen, you've got a couple of questions there. If you can just put them to Graeme, that would be great.
Yeah, I've got them. So I'll just answer the first one just now. So Graeme, what do you advise is our first priority as a business?
I think probably, Stephen, summarising and bringing a lot of what we talked about there together, two things. If you can have two first priorities.
We'll allow you two first priorities.
One is to keep yourselves and your team safe and on side. That's the fundamental, because we have to be here at the other side of this to keep the businesses going forward. But secondly, is to carry out that review of where you're standing in two parts. This is the second priority. The first, to keep fit and healthy, and your team also. The second part is to look at your business, both the budgeting of it. I think that's essential, because you're going to need or may want financial support. And one of the criticisms of the government scheme is the banks have been reluctant, because small businesses in particular haven't produced the goods in terms of things like cash flow and so on. So the budgeting exercise, whether zero-based, the more scientific approach, or incremental, I recommend. And I also recommend at this stage the real need to look at the future of the business and how it's going to be developed going forward.
I think everyone's focused on a lot of science at the moment, so that will make sense to the people listening. So the second question we had throughout the conversation was, what ideas do you have to generate income after the lockdown restrictions that will enable them to return to some form of normality or the new normal?
The list's endless, but I think the starting point for all practices, with the possible exception of criminal legal aid, and I used to do that many, many years ago, is to explore, develop, and harvest that huge potential that's pent up in the existing client bases. Because they're already existing clients and they know you, and you're halfway to them already. And therefore, my priority would be to develop or encourage anyone to develop their business from their existing client base. And coupling that with looking to the future, where those new clients could be garnered from. Because sadly, it is inevitable, and I want to be positive, but we must be realistic. It is inevitable that there will be some casualties, because sadly, some law units, some legal practice units were not in good financial shape before this crisis, and this might for some be the last straw. That is going to mean that when we come out of this, my forecast, I would go as far as to say that, is that there will be, over the months ahead, when we get back to some form of normalcy, there will be fewer law practices, but they will be stronger. And it's imperative that those that are forward thinking think about their financial structure and their business development plan. Time doesn't permit today to go into what the business development plan would be, because again, there is no blueprint. A practice in a rural location in the north of Scotland is going to have a different priority from one in a town or a smaller city. Similarly, a court practice is going to be different from a chamber practice, and so on. But although the recipe for each is different, the key is to open the recipe book and pick the recipe that best fits your appetite.
That's really helpful, and I think answers the question very well. The third question I've got just now that's just came in Could you give us your views on making contact with present clients? Best way to do that, calls, emails, and how do clients respond to an email from their solicitor?
Sure, I'll do that. Yeah, I think all of the above and any other way. I think imagination is important. So imagination, because again, what suits the 90-year-old bachelor, farmer in a remote part of South Ayrshire doesn't suit the young, thrusting, so to speak, first-time buying couple. The approach has to be different. So again, each lawyer knows his existing client base best. And an email is suitable in one case, but not suitable in another. I've already hinted that from my own experience at McKinstry Practice Management, we have been inundated in the past few weeks by service providers of all types. And I have succumbed to the temptation, as many do, of not even opening. And clients will not all be receptive and positively respond to an email. But my experience over 40 years is that clients are generally receptive to a communication. And although it's expensive and it's old-fashioned in many respects, if email is not appropriate, then it may very well be that the offer to them can be done through the traditional letter, or in a smaller location where the clients tend to be more proximate to the office base itself, a mail drop, sensitively done and cheaply delivered by one of the voluntary the youth organizations, or in another case, again, dependent upon the connection between the lawyer and the client, a phone call. So I don't think there is a one size fits all. I think what's most important, rather than determine too much about the medium, is important to get people alive to the opportunity that they already have. Because if a client is contacted by the solicitor in these difficult times, it does a number of things. There's so many benefits. Number one, it strengthens the link and the relationship. The important thing is to try to build the relationship with the client rather than look at him as a transaction. And whether that's done by phone call, by email, by letter, or by some other communication electronically, because we can do, we can do encouragements to visit the website and so on. I don't think there is a panacea for each case. The key is for the lawyers to determine what best suits.
Okay.
Just to follow that up, just quickly there. I know we've just to say and to put it out there to everyone that's listening as well, is that if anyone is considering, if any of our existing clients out there, or anyone at all is looking for any advice or support on how to do that, whether it's sending out the sort of mass email, collating data, marketing messages, anything like that, we are available to support you. I mean, all of that, for whether they're a client or not, to be honest, it's free of charge. And again, just trying to do the right thing here. We can support you with that. So I just want to make sure that offer is clear and out there for everyone, that we will provide an added level of support if anyone is looking to communicate directly with their existing clients.
All right, I don't think we've got any further questions. So just to say, Graeme is available for a chat anytime, so feel free to drop him a line following this session to ask any additional questions you may have, or to arrange a more in-depth conversation about taking up on the offer of support during this challenging time. You can find a lot more information on Graeme's McKinstry Practice Management website, so I encourage you to go there and have a look and see what's on the site and get a wee bit more information about what Graeme does in that. Next week's episode will be in discussion with Grant Yuill, Director at the Glasgow Law Practice, to chat about GLP on demand. Ross and his firm are at the coalface of the challenging environment that Graeme has outlined this afternoon, and Ross is going to go into detail about how GLP were acutely aware that clients are now looking to obtain legal services in a different way, the steps they've taken to address this challenge, and how recent events led them to launch GLP on demand online legal services. with Ross being a very honest character that some of you will be familiar with. We expect this to be a very interesting discussion. So again, this week's episode has been recorded and it will be available to watch on the website in the next 24 hours. The link is on your screen and that will take you straight to the event once it's ready to view. So that brings an end to episode 3 of In Discussion with Denovo. I'd like to thank Graeme and everyone listening for joining us this afternoon.
Stephen and Grant, thank you very much for the opportunity. I've enjoyed sharing my thoughts, stumbling though they may be, and I hope that some of the listeners find something of benefit from it. Thank you again for the opportunity.
No, thank you, Graeme. It's been very insightful and we appreciate you taking the time to do it.
Thank you very much.
And finally, as always, stay home, stay safe. That's almost like Grant's collaboratively there. And enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Can we edit that bit?
We'll see you next time for more discussions with Denovo.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Bye-bye.